13 Russian nationals, 3 Russian companies for interfering in the 2016 election.
There is no allegation in this indictment that any American was a knowing participant in this illegal activity.
The president did take to Twitter to weigh in. The Trump campaign did nothing wrong, no collusion.
There doesn't seem to be any there after a year.
A stunning revelation. The FBI is admitting it mishandled a very specific tip about Nicholas Cruz, the 19-year-old accused of murdering 17 people at a high school earlier this week.
In an equally rare slap from the Attorney General to his FBI, quote, "It is now clear that the warning signs were there and tips to the FBI were missed."
We need to find out exactly what happened that could have saved 17 lives.
The president and his wife in Broward County, Florida.
Very sad something like that could happen. The doctor was amazing, and first responders, everybody. The job they've done is incredible.
Good morning. It is Saturday, February 17th, as you see on your screen. And new information out from the special counsel yesterday about mid-afternoon. If you were watching our channel, you saw news out from Bob Mueller and Rob Rosenstein about so-called Russian collusion. Oh, wait, no Russian collusion. Turns out there were 13 guys with Twitter accounts and Facebook accounts in Russia trying to affect your vote.
And a couple Russian companies.
And a few Russian companies.
Good morning, Pete.
Good morning, Griff, Rachel.
Good
morning.
Good morning.
My head was so in the special counsel in collusion mode. Griff Jenkins, Rachel Campos.
It's a lot to process.
It's a lot to process.
And it's, you know, if you're just waking up, you're pouring that cup of coffee, if you only hear one word today, it is the word unwitting. That is the key point of this, that these 13 Russians that were indicted, they found that there was no knowing unwitting participants of the Trump campaign. In fact, Rod Rosenstein had this to say at that press conference. This is the key point. Take a listen.
The indictment charges 13 Russian nationals and 3 Russian companies for committing federal crimes while seeking to interfere in the United States political system, including the 2016 presidential election. There is no allegation in this indictment that any American was a knowing participant. There is no allegation in the indictment that the charged conduct altered the outcome of the 2016 election.
By the way, I would say these 13 Russians will never be facing trial or unlikely to face trial because there's no extradition agreement or treaty between Russia. So this is just sort
Unless you try to go to Disney World or something, but that's probably not going to happen.
One of them is speaking out this morning. Mikhail Burchik, one of the 13 Russians indicted by the United States for interfering in the American presidential election, says, quote, let's see. I am very surprised that in the opinion of the Washington court, several Russian people interfered in the elections in the United States. I don't know how the Americans came to this decision. They have one-sided justice. Turns out you can hang the blame on anyone, says one of the Russians indicted for committing information warfare against our American elections.
And this started way back in 2014 under Barack Obama's presidency.
And that's exactly what our president, Donald Trump, tweeted yesterday when this all came out. He tweeted this: Russia started their anti-U.S. campaign in 2014, long before I announced that I would run for president. The results of the election were not impacted. The Trump campaign did nothing wrong. No collusion. That's a very important point. When you look at this indictment, the disinformation campaign began in April of 2014, continued through and even after the election when they turned their influence campaign against then elected President Trump. So it was during the Obama administration. It wasn't about the Trump candidacy to begin with. It was about Hillary Clinton. So it's anti-Hillary, anti-America. They spent $1.25 million in a campaign that spent billions and billions of dollars, and no impact on the outcome, no collusion. It's sort of like, all right, Bob Mueller and your special counsel, this is what you've got?
And
all this money, all this time, 13 Russians with Facebook accounts?
And I was going to say the other ironic part of this is that Devin Nunes, who's been sort of the bane of the existence of the left, right? They've been going after him because he's been trying to uncover the truth. Way back in 2014, when the Russians started this, he was telling the Obama administration, hey, there's this Russian thing, and they were ignoring it. They did nothing about it.
Now, let me point out, though, also Rosenstein saying that the special counsel's investigation is not over. It's ongoing. They're continuing to look. Presumably, they are looking, while the Trump campaign did nothing wrong, they could still be looking at obstruction of justice. And actually, Ainsley sat down with an exclusive interview with Vice President Pence that will air on Monday. We can give you just a bite of it now. And she talks to the Vice President about the Mueller investigation. Take a listen.
What does this mean for the Mueller investigation going forward, and what was your reaction to this news?
As you know, our administration has been fully cooperating with the special counsel investigation, and we will continue to. There's no question that Russia sought to interfere, perhaps with other countries, in our electoral process, and it's absolutely essential that we take action against individuals who attempted to interfere with our democracy. There's no suggestion that there was any impact on the outcome of the election, despite what these indictments suggest. We're going to continue to work as an administration to make sure that not only our electoral system, but all of our institutions are better protected against foreign meddling from Russia or any other foreign powers.
Now, this entire interview will air on Fox and Friends as an exclusive on Monday morning between 6 and 9 a.m. You're not going to want to miss it. Ainsley's on the border, U.S.-Mexico border, with the vice president. Fascinating interview. But that portion about Rod Rosenstein, about Bob Mueller, about the indictment, you know, you try to have a little fun, too, in this stuff. When you talk about interference or Russian interference, this is one of the graphics that you may or may not have seen on Facebook, written by Russians. Satan says, if I win, Clinton wins. Jesus says, not if I can help it. Press like to help Jesus win.
These are the ads.
This is one tidbit of some of the ads. We've looked at a lot of them. Listen, someone might like it, retweet it, push it out, but if that had influence on the outcome of the election, then
I can tell you this was very effective in Wisconsin. I really recommend that the Democrats rehire these guys, these Russian guys. Try this in 2018. Come on.
Well,
amazing.
There's a lot more to talk about in that soundbite from Ainsley's interview, but we have to turn now to the other story, a Fox News alert, the FBI failing to investigate teen gunman Nikolas Cruz after receiving a tip about his erratic behavior 6 weeks before the Florida high school massacre.
This, as we learned, the 19-year-old will reportedly plead guilty if the death penalty is totally off the table.
Now, Rob Schmidt is live from Parkland, Florida, with the developing details. Rob?
Yeah, good morning, guys. And the funerals have begun after this horrible tragedy from Wednesday, and the shocking news that came out yesterday that really just really shocked everybody in this neighborhood and in this community was the FBI's admission that they had gotten this tip, this rock-solid lead, had come into their tip line about 6 weeks ago that talked about Nikolas Cruz, about his gun ownership, about all of these things that could have led to this. And that lead was never passed on to the Miami field office. And it's really, really, really looks bad for the FBI. Let's go ahead and give you just a piece of the statement that the FBI put out. The caller provided information about Cruz's gun ownership, desire to kill people, and the potential of him conducting a school shooting. That's about as good as a lead as you can expect to get for something like this to happen. Here is FBI agent Robert Lasky, who is with the Miami Field Division of the FBI, the division that never got that tip so that they could follow up on it, and he defends the FBI.
The potential of the FBI to miss something is always there. We do our best. We have normal protocols to prevent these things. We will be looking into where and how, if the protocol broke down, and we will come back stronger than we ever were before.
Well, it's really bad, but let's go to a statement from the governor here of Florida, Rick Scott. He says, "We constantly promote see something, say something. And a courageous person did just that to the FBI, and the FBI failed to act. The FBI director needs to resign." So we're going to see what the fallout is of this on the FBI, and if they're going to figure out who it was that this lapse happened with, who didn't pass this along within the FBI. And as we talk about that, the first 2 funerals for the 17 victims of this horrible crime were yesterday on Friday. And we can tell you a little bit about these two young women. 18-year-old Meadow Pollock, a senior here at this high school, who was looking to go to Lynn University in nearby Boca Raton this fall. And also 14-year-old Alyssa Al-Hadaf, a soccer player who wanted to grow up and be an attorney. Let's hear from their friends at the funerals.
I was with Meadow, talking to Meadow right before, the gunman started shooting. Right. Yeah, it's, it is very sad, but at the same time, I know that she's in a safer place now, and the angels will be with her.
It's supposed to be closure, but at this age, it really isn't. It was just senseless, and these girls shouldn't be here. They should be in school today.
It's just a terrible story all the way around, and the police say the 19-year-old Nikolas Cruz has confessed and will plead guilty in this crime if the death penalty is off the table. So he does not want to have the same fate as the people that he killed here in this school. Guys, we'll send it back to you.
Thank you, Rob.
Rob Schmidt, live on the scene. Thank you. Appreciate it. Obviously a big mistake with tragic consequences. You've got a huge bureaucracy with tons of tips that called in, and they didn't follow up on this one, even though it looked like something they should be following up on.
The president was in Florida consoling and at the hospital, by the way, with some of the responders and some of the employees that work there, the doctors, the first responders. Good that he's there, but I just can't imagine being a parent of one of these victims, those that died, those that were injured, knowing that there was a credible, specific threat 1 month ago, the second tip that the FBI had, and it wasn't followed up on. It's got to just hurt even more.
And, they will never get an answer as to why this happened. And having covered all these tragedies in years past, it is the most difficult job as a reporter to ask parents why. But now they have credible reasons to question the FBI. And you will remember, we'll talk some more about this, but there's so many instances of the FBI missing things in the job they have to try and find.
Your government's going to make mistakes. You can't always count on the authorities to get it right, and you have to take it in your own hands.
Well, we're going to turn now to some of your headlines. Chief of Staff John Kelly ordering an overhaul of the White House security clearance process. Kelly outlining the changes in a memo to staff saying, we must do better. Among the changes, asking for the FBI to notify the White House about any issues and background checks within 48 hours, limiting access to classified information for people with temporary clearances, and frequent status reports on pending background checks. This comes after criticism over former staff Rob Porter, who had a top clearance despite domestic abuse allegations. The fate of Dreamers in the U.S. could be decided by the Supreme Court. The 9 justices holding a closed-door meeting about whether to take up the case. 2 federal judges blocked the Trump administration's move to end DACA, the program that protects hundreds of thousands of young adults brought to the U.S. illegally as children. The justices could announce their decision as early as next week. And those are your headlines.
I don't love that many of the things end at the court. You know what I mean? That's
I agree with you on that.
All right, you just heard about the DOJ indicting 13 Russians for election interference. So what does this mean for the Democrats' collusion narrative? We will ask Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton next.
Plus, Mitt Romney speaking out about Russia hours after announcing his Senate run. And get this, he agrees with President Trump. You'll hear from him just ahead.
On that, maybe.
We weren't born.
We are back with a Fox News alert. The Justice Department announcing the indictment of 13 Russians and 3 Russian organizations for meddling in the 2016 presidential election. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein said there were no signs of U.S. involvement. Tom Fitton from Judicial Watch joins us now to discuss the latest. Tom, you have followed this start to now. You saw Rod Rosenstein come out and say no evidence of Americans involved. What do you make of the indictment of 13 Russians and 3 Russian companies?
Well, in some ways, it's old news in the sense it summarizes material that's been in the media for some time, that the Russians were monkeying around with our system by playing on Facebook and pretending to be Americans involved in our political process and supporting and opposing candidates, but not in any way that you can say was ultimately supportive of President Trump. When you have the indictment confirming they actually set up rallies trying to oppose him once he was elected. You know, look, at the end, we have this massive Russia investigation, find no collusion with the Trump campaign. I don't understand why we are still talking about a special counsel investigating the president in light of this indictment.
Well, we've known the Russians have tried to interfere with our elections since, I don't know, the Cold War. I mean, they used to try to assassinate our presidents. I mean, we know the Russians are not our friends. But in this particular case, they weren't, as you said, they weren't propping up then candidate Trump. They were going after Hillary Clinton. They were propping up Bernie Sanders. They were trying to sow confusion. So after all this time, all this money spent on a special counsel, is this what we're going to find, or is there any collusion to be found there at all?
Look, those who say that the Trump campaign colluded with the Russians are going to have to start providing evidence other than in the Clinton DNC dossier. You know, this is what was in the news this week. We had the Susan Rice email implicating Joe Biden, Barack Obama, Sally Yates, James Comey, and Susan Rice in a conspiracy to get Trump on Russia. You had information that the #4 official at the Obama Justice Department, Bruce Ohr, hid information about his relationship with the Clinton campaign cash machine, basically Fusion GPS, that was collaborating with Russian intelligence to launder dirt against, or really defamatory dirt against President Trump into the FBI DOJ apparatus. And you've got this indictment of Russians abroad. An indictment's never really going to see the light of day in terms of trial because they're never going to come here. It's never going to be tried. We're never going to find out whether anything in the indictment's true. And what would they rather be talking about? This indictment where they found, despite all of the king's horses and all the king's men, not one American colluded with the Russians when they were trying to play games here in the American political campaigns.
I don't think your statement is entirely true. Some Americans did collude with the Russians, and it looked like it was the Democrats and the Hillary Clinton campaign. So will that ever be pointed to?
Pete, you're exactly right, but why isn't Rod Rosenstein holding press conferences about an investigation into that?
Sure.
Why isn't this Justice Department looking into the abuse of the FISA process? Look, the Russians were trying to make it clear to the Clinton camp that they had dirt on Trump and they were going to use it against him. And all of that was false. And Trump was victimized, and the FBI, rather than trying to protect him, used it as a pretext, working with the Clinton campaign to target him under the corrupt Obama administration. You know, this Russia indictment shows the Russia collusion scandal is over as far as Trump is concerned.
Wow, it's the Captain Obvious special counsel. Tell us something we didn't know, that Russia has been trying to interfere in our elections, but they so far have found absolutely nothing on collusion with the Trump campaign. Tom Fitton, thank you for your contributions. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks, Pete.
You got it. All right, well, what's the point of see something, say something if the FBI does nothing? That's the question many people are asking this morning after they failed to follow up on a tip about the Florida school shooter. A former FBI agent joins us next. Welcome back to Fox and Friends on this Saturday morning. Some quick headlines for you. In just a few hours, large crowds are expected to honor a fallen Chicago police commander killed in the line of duty. Commander Paul Bauer will be laid to rest today, a day after thousands line the streets to pay their final respects. The husband and father was on the force for more than 3 decades before being shot to death earlier this week. God bless him. And a second story, a new twist in the case of an illegal immigrant found guilty of murdering 2 deputies. Luis Bracamontes, I don't really care if I pronounce his name properly, making headlines for this outburst. A California jury now finding his wife, an American citizen, guilty of murder as well after aiding Bracamontes in his killing spree. Monroe arguing she feared her husband and would have been killed if she didn't help. Sounds plausible to me. She could spend her life behind bars. Rachel Griff, down to you guys.
Thank you, Pete. Bracamontes. The FBI now facing harsh criticism after revealing Friday that they failed to act after receiving a call last month from someone close to school shooting suspect Nikolas Cruz, expressing concerns about his erratic behavior and disturbing social media posts.
Under normal protocol, this information should have been provided to the Miami field office. Their appropriate investigative steps would have been taken. The FBI has determined that protocol was not followed.
So what went wrong, and how can we prevent this from happening again? Here to weigh in, former FBI counterterrorism agent Tim Clemente. Tim, 17 dead. They missed it. Why?
My only thing that I can say is the hope that it fell through the cracks. I hope this wasn't something that was done because of laziness, because nobody in a position within the FBI can be lazy. You can't be. The people who trust and rely on the FBI as their premier law enforcement agency to do what they can to prevent things like this. And it's just a horrific thing to hear about. The crime itself was horrific, but then to hear that it was compounded by the fact, or actually happened because of the fact that an agent somewhere or somebody within the FBI did not do their job. Heads need to roll on this. This is completely unacceptable. And the only thing I can think is that maybe somebody thought they had done the proper communication and proper notification, but in fact it was not done. And I'm hoping it wasn't beyond just negligence, that it wasn't something more adversarial, like somebody was, you know, we have so much politics going on right now within the Bureau, especially in middle and upper management, that it's understandable that there's going to be cracks in the system because there's a very, very, very large lack of leadership between the director and the street agents that needs to be fixed very quickly and very publicly for the FBI to assure the American public that they're doing what they should be doing.
So what's frustrating in this situation is I think the American citizens, the students, the people calling into the tip lines, the vlogger, they all did exactly what the FBI and the police tell them to do in these situations. So what can the FBI do at this point to make sure this never happens again? What are the systems they need to make sure are in place?
I think we need a system of checks and balances that would take the response to these calls outside just the purview of the FBI. It should be local authorities, state authorities, mental health officials. I think what really needs to be done is maybe we create a whole new 911 system for these types of threats, where you think it's a you know, a Las Vegas type shooter, a school shooter, a mall shooter, a church shooter, anything like that, where you have some kind of a mass public threat. There should be a system where somebody calls a number, a toll-free number, whatever it is, like a 911, that then alerts the local, state, federal authorities and also healthcare professionals, so that everybody can then look at the other agency and say, are you doing anything? Are we doing anything? What could they be doing? So that there's a little more accountability for a situation like this, because unfortunately this information needs to be dealt with immediately, as we've seen. I mean, this tip came in within a matter of weeks of this psychotic young man killing several individuals in a school. Innocent people died. And if there had been more people responsible for that information, then there would have been the greater likelihood that somebody would have seen that it wasn't being responded to properly by the FBI, and they could have been held their feet to the fire.
Tim, you know, Rush Limbaugh weighed in on this, and he said, look, maybe this fell through the cracks because the FBI is so focused on other things. Here's what Rush Limbaugh had to say about it.
Is it possible, ladies and gentlemen, that the FBI may not have the resources to deal with complaints like this? How many people at the FBI are still trying to prove that Trump colluded with Russia? Hillary Clinton and the Democrats have the FBI so occupied tracking down something that didn't happen, they may not have the resources to pull this kid off the street.
Tim, what do you say to that?
Well, I would say that, you know, Rush is one of the greatest communicators in the history of communication. And I think what he's saying is partially true. When you have guys like Peter Strzok, lawyers like Lisa Page, administrators like McCabe at the top of the FBI, very, very, very politically active and acting not like objective observers and investigators to try and find the truth, which is what the mission of an FBI agent is. Not to put people in jail, not to do anything other than to find the truth. And they weren't seeking the truth. They were looking for political things. They were looking for political flaws in their enemies, their political enemies, so they could go after them. And if you're doing that, you cannot be at the same time maintaining the security of the American people.
Yeah. Well, Tim, thank you so much. No consolation for those families in that, but very interesting thoughts. You're absolutely right about that. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you. You're welcome.
President Trump says Robert Mueller's 13 indictments handed to Russian nationals vindicates him. Dan Bongino joins us next to talk about that.
And a school district pulls its high school graduation from a church over a cross. The growing controversy just ahead.
The indictment says it started in 2014, well before Trump announced. It is a good day for President Trump. It is significant that the investigation has gone on this long and you don't have the collusion case. And keep in mind, if you look at the Flynn plea papers and you look at the Papadopoulos plea papers, but particularly Flynn's, it looks like there is going to be no collusion case.
Well, we have 13 months, give or take, of the Trump presidency, and with it come 13 Russians with Twitter and Facebook accounts. Let's bring in Dan Bongino, former Secret Service agent, former NYPD officer, and host of the Dan Bongino Show, and contributor at NRA TV. Dan, thanks for joining us this morning. So, big indictment from the Mueller camp of 13 Russians and 3 Russian companies. What do you make of it?
I bet there's a lot here, Pete. So let me just start off first by saying I fully realize that nothing I say, you say, or anybody else says is going to change liberal minds. They're absolutely convinced there's a big collusion conspiracy here, and I get it. Your skulls are 6 feet thick. You're committed to this. You think the president is guilty of treason. I get nothing I'm saying is going to change that. I'm just telling you, you're living in a fantasy land. There's no collusion now. There was no collusion yesterday. There was no collusion last year. There's no collusion that's going to happen tomorrow. There's no collusion. Read the indictment. Even worse, Pete, one more point of this. If you read number 53, line 53 of the indictment, they're lined out it's pretty easy to see. You'll see that they actually had groups up there that were Support Hillary, Save American Muslims. These are actual names of groups these Russians supported. There's no collusion. You're just making it up.
Right. And also, I would say that in the indictment, there was no mention of the dossier, which has done more to disrupt American politics than these really stupid ads that we saw, these Facebook ads that we saw come out of this, this indictment.
Right. Now, Rachel, I'm glad you brought that up, because although there is categorically no collusion with the Trump team and these Russians, you can't unwittingly collude, okay? It's not possible. If you understand the definition of collusion, you can't unwittingly collude. It makes no sense. Like, wake up, smell the coffee, okay? But you bring up a critical point. There clearly was some form of collusion with this dossier and Russians. There's no question about that. That information came from 2 places in the dossier. Russians and Clinton consiglieres who information laundered it through the justice system.
Dan, I want you to react to your friend and Minority Leader of the House, Nancy Pelosi, who this was her statement. We'll put it up now. As desperately as President Trump insists that the special counsel investigation is a hoax, these latest indictments build on multiple guilty pleas and indictments of several Trump campaign officials, demonstrating the gravity of the Trump-Russia scandal. We are on the eve of the 2018 midterm elections. There is no time to waste to defend the integrity of our elections and our democracy. What do you say, Dan?
You know, do you understand you're being lied to? No, I mean, I really mean this. Like, I worked for Barack Obama for a long time as a Secret Service agent. I categorically was against just about every one of his policy prescriptions. I would never accuse this man of something serious like treason or collusion ever, even now, even though he's out of office, if I didn't have hard evidence. that the former Speaker of the House and the Minority Leader, Nancy Pelosi, goes out there and just disgraces herself, the country, her office, her party, and anyone around her by continuing to knowingly, by the way, and wittingly, unlike this collusion scandal, lie to the American people about a collusion scandal that never happened is so disgusting that it's hard for me to discuss without using FCC banned words. That's how upset I am about this thing.
But you can do that on your podcast, but you can't do that here, Dan. Sorry about that.
You're right. Yes.
If you look at the indictment, the DOJ indictment, the disinformation campaign from the Russians, which was on Twitter, and they only spent $1.25 million in an election where billions was spent, it began in April of 2014. Remember, President Trump is not president in 2014. Barack Obama is. What does this say about the failure to act of that administration when they saw the warning signs about Russia trying to, I don't know, discredit our electoral process?
Yet they sat back, Pete. They sat on their hands, the Obama administration. They did nothing. And you know what people forget? There's an interesting soundbite out there with Obama when he was just leaving office, when they asked him about this in a presser during the transition in this Russian attack on our republic, which, by the way, did happen. Nobody's disputing that, to be crystal clear. We're just saying it had nothing to do with the Trump team. They didn't collude. But Obama says in the presser, he's like, listen, this wasn't some, I'm paraphrasing a bit, forgive me, but he did say this wasn't some form of a sophisticated attack or anything. In other words, trying to distance his administration from the blame I think they knew they would take later. But you're asking a legitimate question, and I don't say this to spark some partisan war. This was a serious and more than credible hit the Russians tried to do. But where was the Obama team? Where were they? Were they so concerned with the reset that they didn't want to insult the Russians' delicate sensibilities, so they sat back and did nothing? Pete, that's a very legitimate question. And, you know, people like Adam Schiff and Nancy Pelosi and these hyper-partisans maybe need to look in the mirror a little bit at their own party.
Dan, we need to find that soundbite and play it later on in the program. I'm serious. I mean, because he was asked about it. He did comment at it on the end of his presidency, and that could be very revealing. As always, Dan Bongino illuminating us this morning.
I know. It's 6:40 in the morning, and you have this much energy. That's why you're our favorite guest.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks for joining us, Dan.
A lot of coffee.
Yeah.
See ya.
I want to drink what he's drinking.
Yeah, diesel.
All right. Turning now to your headlines. Mitt Romney speaking out on Russia just hours after announcing his Senate run in Utah.
I agree with the president that they didn't determine the outcome here in our nation in any way. But what they've done is unacceptable. I'm glad that they're being held accountable and believe that without question that Russians are trying to interfere with the principles of elected democracy, and that's got to end.
Romney running for the Utah Senate seat that will be vacated by Orrin Hatch, who is retiring.
Oh, good. Another sanctimonious never-Trumper in Washington. Can't wait.
A white nationalist now backtracking on his statements after claiming the Florida high school shooter was a member of his extremist group in Tallahassee. Jordan Jareb now calling his identification of Nikolas Cruz a, quote, misunderstanding. His response coming out after law enforcement agencies say there's no evidence of Cruz's involvement with the white supremacist organization.
Oh, but they ran with it for a while.
For a little bit.
Fake news.
A Texas school district will no longer hold its graduation ceremonies at one of the largest mega churches in the country. Prestonwood Baptist Church pastor claiming it's because they refused to remove the cross in their sanctuary. This after a group of atheists complained about the public school system using a Christian church, ending a more than a decade tradition for the McKinney School District. And those are your headlines. By the way, remember at Georgetown when President Obama went to visit Georgetown University, which is a Jesuit Catholic university, he requested to have the crosses covered. Georgetown complied. This church saying, no, we're not going to cover it. And now you have this controversy.
Good for them. I love when we rip more God out of our country.
Yeah.
It always goes well.
Yeah.
Right?
I like hearing from Mitt Romney. Boy, we're going to hear more of that. Here we go. All right, still
I hope
ahead.
that was sarcastic.
Still ahead. Byron York, Jason Chaffetz, and Sarah Carter are here live.
Plus, Joy Behar, you know her and you love her, getting slammed for attacking Vice President Mike Pence over his faith.
It's one thing to talk to Jesus. It's another thing when Jesus talks to you. It's called mental illness, if I'm not correct.
Jesus also talked to Oprah, but they didn't talk about that. How do Christians feel about that? Well, Lawrence Jones visited St. Patrick's Cathedral, and he tells us what he found out. Coming up next. Lawrence, come on in.
That should be interesting.